So it's a pleasure on behalf of all the team at Classic FM to welcome the incredible Kris Bowers. Kris, I don't know where to start. Oscar winner, Emmy winner, Grammy Award nominee, and now director, adding that to your list of accolades, having just won an Oscar for your incredible documentary, The Last Repair Shop. Welcome.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Could we start with Bridgerton, because it has been such a runaway success, and the music you created for that has just been phenomenal and so much part of the success of Bridgerton. How did you begin the process of composing? When you think of period drama meeting pop, or what were your first thoughts on that composition journey?
Yeah, so when they first told me that they wanted the score to really reflect the fact that this wasn't your typical Regency era period drama, one of the first attempts I thought might be interesting was I wrote a bunch of music that sounded like it was from the period, and then I chopped it up into samples, and then I made like pop tracks with them essentially, and like hip hop beats with them, and that wasn't the direction they wanted to go in.
Oh,
And
wow.
then, the next error that I tried was I thought maybe it would be interesting to write music that was incredibly accurate to the time period, but then record it in a really modern way, so that we'd have this approach to orchestration and writing that was represented in a more tactile, modern way. And we tried that, and it just felt like it was a too much of the time. And so, two things actually really helped me find the sound of that show. One, the showrunner at the time, Chris Van Dusen, sent me some Ravel piano pieces that he really loved. And for me, I hadn't been thinking of Ravel as an option because I was going back and forth between either this needs to sound like 1813 or it needs to sound like today. And I never thought about any other time period in between. And so when they offered Ravel, I was really surprised and excited by the idea of now being able to pull from other, periods and other composers and other styles. And then the second thing that was really helpful was when they started choosing the covers, because Alex Patsavas, the music supervisor, had already been working with Chris and Shonda to pull these classical covers. And so when I heard the first one, the Thank You Next in episode one, I believe, of season one, I was immediately excited by how that song puts the viewers immediately in the seat empathetically of the characters we're dealing with, and that anybody watching these young women walking to the space can now project their own connections to this song into this environment where they recognize that, like, oh, I know, this song I used to listen to because of this ex or this, person I used to deal with that wasn't worth my time or whatever it was about. But now they could watch this scene and really feel all these very clear feelings. And so that also helped me think about how to approach the music from a rhythmic perspective, a tempo perspective, and melody and harmony, and have things be more influenced by pop music in that sense, so that if somebody heard music that made them want to move and dance, it was informed by music that makes us want to move and dance today, as opposed to that period. So I think that those two things were the most helpful in me really locking into the sound of that show.
So the sound of Ravel lent a helping hand to Bridgerton.
Yes, yeah, 100%.
And do you have a favourite moment of all the artists that you've worked with on the show? Do you have a favourite moment of musical collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's not for Bridgerton specifically, it's for the Bridgerton verse, but for Queen Charlotte, when we did the Alicia Keys "If I Ain't Got You" orchestral arrangement, I was the producer for that, and Bobby Gardner was this amazing arranger that did it. But that was really amazing to see not only that piece come to life with this orchestra, but they also worked really hard to have this orchestra of an entire orchestra of women of color, and to have all of these amazing musicians also be dressed in like Bridgerton gowns for this music video thing that they did. It really felt like one of these moments that was unlike any other moment and really special. And so I'm really proud to be a part of that.
I definitely got the sense it was a moment that would have inspired many future musicians.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing about this show that I feel so thankful about being a part of. I remember with season one, I had some friends of mine who I've known since high school who played on the score, and they said that they actually had an increase in young people asking for violin lessons or cello lessons because of Bridgerton, because they were excited about classical music because of that show. So, being a part of that, or like you said, the Alicia Keys moment that I'm sure also affected a lot of young people, a lot of young women. Definitely feels amazing to be a part of a show that's inspiring people to pick up an instrument and get into classical music.
And season 3 just about to drop here in the UK. Can you tell us what surprises you got in store, or is there a little something special on the way musically?
It's funny. I feel like I'm always scared to say anything because of spoilers, but the things I'm really excited about are always new covers, and to be a part of that has been pretty exciting. And then with each season we're focusing on new characters, so there's new themes. So I think what's really fun about this show is that there are themes that have existed from the previous seasons that continue, and also now even themes from Queen Charlotte that are in the show because of the characters that we see in this show uh, acting different ways. But this season we're focusing on Penelope and Colin and their relationship, and it's so different from the previous two seasons in terms of some sort of love dynamic. And so having new themes for each of them and their theme together was a lot of fun to explore this season.
You mentioned the music of Ravel had a helping influence on the music that you created for Bridgerton. Who were the composers, classical composers, or the music that influenced you when you were growing up?
Yeah, so when I was growing up, what's so interesting is that, I was in classical lessons, but I was also taking jazz lessons, and I was so much more um, connected to jazz music. And it wasn't until I fell in love with film score that I had this bridge to classical music. Because I remember studying, different pieces like playing Chopin or Clementi or these different pieces of music that I had heard before, or were really familiar, or easy to play, and there was something about it that wasn't really clicking for me. And it wasn't until I remember falling so deeply in love with John Williams and his music, and then somebody pointing out the similarities between his approach to orchestration and writing, and Tchaikovsky and Ravel and Stravinsky, and like all of these composers that he was influenced by in the classical space. And I think that just all of a sudden helped me hear the classical music in a different way, where I started getting so into it when I was uh, in high school and definitely through college. And so the classical composers that I connect to at that point were, I would say Shostakovich, Stravinsky, Tchaikovsky, uh, Prokofiev, Ravel, Debussy, and also finding more modern composers like Steve Reich and Philip Glass was really interesting to me because I hadn't heard them before, and to hear a piece of music that spoke so deeply to me, and I felt like I heard a bit of my own self in that music, and had never heard that composer before, I think was really interesting. So I feel like those are the first handful that I started to fall deeply in love with.
You mentioned John Williams there, and you also gave him a mention in your Oscar acceptance speech, which was a beautiful, beautiful speech. Can you tell us what it was about John Williams' music and why he was so important to mention in that moment?
Yeah, so for me, it was the realization when I was going to see those incredible movies of the 90s, those, Spielberg movies, thinking about Jurassic Park, or even it's 80s, but like E.T. When I watched it when I was a kid in the 90s, or my dad sharing his favorite movies, which happened to be Star Wars and Indiana Jones. And so to have this intergenerational connection of Spielberg and George Lucas and John Williams, I think was the reason why I was so exposed to him specifically. But I also think that he's probably the greatest of all time when it comes to that translation of emotion. So I remember listening to his music outside of the context of watching the film, and I still felt the same rush of excitement, the same sense of adventure, the same, sense of longing, or any of those emotions I felt watching the movie. I felt very clearly just listening to the music. And so there was a light bulb moment of realization that there was a job where you have to translate emotions into music, and having this connection with piano that was very emotional, that felt like immediately what I wanted to do. So really it's just because John Williams is to me the greatest when it comes to expressing emotion through music and in a film sense and how to convey ideas and build throughout an entire film with themes and all that stuff and to be exposed to that at that age and have that desire to do that through his music is why he always will be, you know, the greatest for me.
Final question. I don't know if it's possible for you to pick out a career highlight so far, because I'm thinking about you playing it for the Obamas at the White House, but also Aretha Franklin sort of pointing you out as one to watch at that international jazz competition at the Kennedy Center. Do you have a favorite moment so far, or is that too hard to pick? Is there a top five?
Yeah, maybe top five is a little easier. Definitely hard to pick. Um, you know, it would I would say these moments where I'm a part of something that lifts somebody else up is really profound, you know, because I think that's what speaks to the power of art or the power of this space in a way that's, you know, really meaningful. Like the power of being successful in this industry to raise up yourself is not as impressive to me or not as like profound as the ability this platform gives you to lift up somebody else. And so I would say that, you know, making The Last Repair Shop and lifting up those individuals, making the other film I made with Ben, A Concerto is a Conversation, which is about my grandfather, and to have my grandfather, who at this point 95 years old, you know, worked his entire life to make sure that his family was going to be able to be secure, and did that again without any sort of thought of who was going to recognize him for that or thank him for that. And I'll never forget calling him the day we were nominated for an Oscar for that film, and he was not only overcome with emotion, but his first reaction was, "I have no idea what I did to deserve this." And
Oh,
that
wow.
him saying that makes me feel even still emotional thinking about him uh, having that feeling about people responding to his story that way. Um, and then, you know, there's projects that have done that, thinking about working with Ava DuVernay on Origin and When They See Us, and how much those projects really highlighted these stories that were so important, and these ideas and concepts, both with like mass incarceration and with Origin, this idea of caste and like how those conversations need to be had. Green Book as well, just because it was something that lifted me up in my own career, but also with Don Shirley, like I never knew about his music until making that film, and you know how important people's understanding of the Green Book is in this day and age. And lastly, number five, I'd say working with Kobe Bryant. You know, he was such a mentor to me. He actually was the first person to actually physically introduce me to John Williams, because he was such a huge fan of John Williams and had a relationship with him. And I learned so much about my process because of Kobe. Like one of our first conversations about the documentary I scored on him, he said, "This film is obviously about me and my life, but I want you to watch each of these scenes and think about what that reminds you of in your own life and reflect on that moment in your own life and write from that emotional place, and it'll be great." And that's how I approach almost every one of my scores, is thinking about how I can create an internal mirror within myself that reflects whatever's happening in the story that I can write from. But I worked with him up until he passed, and he would always push me to write on the same level as John Williams, because in his mind, John Williams was my Michael Jordan, essentially. And to have someone push for me to write with that level of excellence in orchestration and composition, I think was so integral to my career. One of the last things I said to him, I have this violin concerto that I wrote, and I invited him to come to the show, and it was literally just about a week or two before he passed, and I thanked him because I told him that as much as I've fallen in love with classical music, my actual ability to orchestrate and my ability to write for the orchestra in that way came almost entirely from like the amount of work that I did with him, and what he demanded from me in that writing. And so my ability to write for the orchestra in the concert space, I think really came from a lot of that relationship. So that would definitely be one that I'm still so thankful for.
Well, Kris, we wish you continued success uplifting so many through your music. It's just been an honor to talk to you today. Thank you for giving your time to all the listeners and viewers that love Classic FM and love music and love what you're doing. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for everybody for listening and watching.